Fantastic. So we have started recording. Please make sure that your cameras and your mics are off through the kind of consultation. What we will do is we'll ask people if they want to ask their questions verbally. Tom will be able to unmute you and you'll be able to do that. In terms of the the format of the session, we have got some slides, and we will be sharing those with you, which gives a kind of general background of the Small Sites SPD, the contents, and then there'll be a Q&A session. You'll notice that that Zoom, hopefully everyone's fairly familiar with Zoom now, but we have a chat box. We invite people to ask their questions within the chat box, and we will respond to those. And as I said, if you do want to then ask your question verbally, Tom will unmute you. If we could just ask that the questions that you ask are related to the small sites, SBD, and small sites generally, that would be excellent. We will try to answer as many questions during the session as we can, which are relevant to the small sites SPD. Those questions that we don't get around to, although I think we probably will be able to get around to them in this session tonight. If not, we will we'll provide a written response to those. Just in terms of, as I said, the format, we will always have our camera on so you can see our faces when we present. But as I said, if you could please stay on mute and have your camera switched off, that would be fantastic through the kind of presentation session. Any technical issues, please use the chat and Tom will try to solve those issues. If you can't hear me, if you can't see the presentation, then please let me know. If you get kicked off the session, then please just use the link and the password provided to try to reconnect. If you can't reconnect, then apologies for that. But as I said, there will be the recording of this session so that you can see the presentation and hear the discussion. In terms of the panel members for tonight, so I'm David Syme. I am the Strategic Planning Manager at Lewisham. So I head up the planning policy team, the design conservation team, and the Section 106 and SIL team. I'm also joined by Tom Atkinson from the housing, who's the Housing and Growth Manager in the housing team. Give us a wave, Tom.
Hello, everyone.
And we're also joined by Monique Wallace, who is the Development Planning Manager in the housing team.
Evening, everyone.
Fantastic. And as we'll try to answer as many questions as you have. Next slide, Tom. So why is Lewisham preparing small sites guidance? This generally is in response to the London plan. So you may be aware that the Mayor and the GLA produce effectively a planning policy document for the whole of London. This was recently adopted in March 2021. And within this document, there is a new policy, which is a focus on small site development, which is policy H2. And this is really in response to a push by the GLA to develop more small sites across London and contribute more significantly to providing kind of housing. As kind of Lewisham, we felt there is a need to respond to that. What we want to do is guide small sites to so that they are of high quality, that they're in the right place, and that they respond to the kind of Lewisham way of delivering housing. So that is why we have sought to do this. Next slide, please. That is set within the context of our housing targets, which are set by the London Plan and the GLA. Our previous London Plan target for Lewisham was 1,385 homes per annum. The new London Plan target is 1,667 homes, which is an increase of 35%. For the first time ever, that overall figure has a small sites contribution of 379 homes per annum relating to policy H2 within the London Plan. So we will be assessed against the delivery of small sites within Lewisham. These figures, overall figures, and the small sites contribution represent homes granted permission to all landowners, so private developers, housing association, the council, self-builders, etc., etc. Next slide, please. Now, this is policy H2 in the London Plan. So what policy H2 does is it directs boroughs to proactively support well-designed new homes on small sites. So in many ways, we're not being asked whether or not we think we should provide more homes on small sites. We are being directed to do so by the GLA and by the London Plan. So it's critical that we have the guidance in place to make sure that those small sites are delivered in the right areas, the right places and locations in the borough, but also to the high quality standard that we want to see in the borough. Policy H2, the reasons why the London Plan wants to do this, wants to significantly increase the contribution of small sites to meeting London's housing needs. It wants to diversify the sources, the type and the mix of housing in that supply. It wants to support small and medium-sized house builders, support custom, self-build and community-led housing, and obviously achieve the minimum targets that I've just set out in the previous slide. Next slide, please, Tom. What is a small site? So a small site is any development site that is smaller than or equates to 0.25 hectares. Now, hectares isn't really a very commonly used measurement. So we've just given an indication of what that means in the document itself. So it's approximately a third of a football pitch. And approximately 8 tennis courts, just to give you a size. So this means anything from that size of development all the way down to a small site, which is a single dwelling essentially. Next slide, please. So why encourage the delivery of small sites? First and foremost, we need to deliver much needed housing. We need to deliver more homes overall, but we also need to deliver those that are genuinely affordable. It's important to say that the emerging local plan, the draft local plan that we've just consulted on, is proposing an affordable homes contribution for small sites for the first time. So currently, in terms of planning policy, all sites on 10 or under 10 units do not need to contribute to affordable housing. We are trying to rectify that through the draft local plan, so that small sites would have to contribute financially, and that would then be able to contribute to the delivery of affordable housing through our Lewisham Homes programme. Why do we need to deliver these homes? We need to provide permanent homes for the 900 families currently in temporary accommodation. We currently have 10,000 families on the council's housing register. We are expecting an increase in homelessness as a result of job losses after the pandemic. And we also have to ensure that we hit our annual housing target. If we do not hit our annual housing target, the government have introduced the housing delivery test. And if we continue to miss our housing target, then we will face penalties, which means that we will lose control of our local decision-making on such applications. And just to give you an idea of, or an example of the small sites that we're talking about, on the right-hand side here, this is Dacre Park South, which is new affordable homes delivered by Lewisham Homes. This was on a site of 6 garages, which were essentially vacant or used as kind of permanent storage. What we've delivered there is genuinely affordable homes and provided a much better interface to the street. Next slide, please. The other reasons why we want to encourage small sites, we want to encourage a more diverse supply in our housing delivery. So at the moment, Lewisham is heavily reliant on large strategic sites such as Timberyard, Lewisham Gateway, for example, and we want to diversify that supply to make it more resilient. We also want to encourage local SMEs to build within Lewisham, the local builders, the small developers, and thus to stimulate the local economy, local supply chains, everything from housing, window suppliers down to building supply merchants, etc., and hopefully create jobs through apprenticeships, etc. We want to create diversity in design, and we see that throughout Lewisham, that we have a range of design being delivered, but also historically as well. And we want to optimize the use of existing complex and unusual spaces to deliver more homes, which we see across the borough. Next slide, Tom. And then finally, supporting our communities. There is an opportunity here to increase the densities and critical mass of people within our suburbs. This in turn will help support local centres and facilities. We want to encourage self-builders and co-op housing to develop within the borough on private land. And we want to help coordinate the delivery of infrastructure, particularly within the south of the borough that doesn't necessarily have the large strategic sites. How can we coordinate the delivery of small sites and collect the community infrastructure levy to provide or to deliver that infrastructure within the south of the borough. Next slide, please. Just here, we wanted to give some examples so that people knew what we were talking about, knew the sorts of development that we were looking at. So everything from the sort of single dwelling. So this was, this is two homes actually, in place of some garages on the end of a terrace. In its current or in its existing, the previous context, there was a lot of antisocial behaviour, a lot of fly tipping that happened on there. There wasn't really anyone using the garages, for example, and there wasn't any eyes on the street. So this was then delivered by a private developer to create an end of terrace, two sustainable homes, and provide a much better relationship with the street, provide surveillance onto that street, and mitigate the antisocial behaviour. Next slide, please. Another example to the south of the borough. So this is Sydenham High Street. There was a gap in the high street, single-storey retail unit, and a gap site. Again, private developer through the planning process, creating 15 flats and houses, including affordable family homes to the rear, and commercial space fronting the high street within the Sydenham ward, and really picking up some of the aesthetics in a modern way, in a modern interpretation, but picking up some of the aesthetics, the kind of flank gables, etc., and pulling through the kind of datum line of the kind of ground floor in a successful way as well. Next slide, please. Sparewell Street. So again, some poor quality land, which was kind of informal parking, a bit of kind of scrub vegetation, Again, lots of kind of fly tipping in this area. And this was redeveloped to provide 6 homes that responded to the adjacent public space, and also allowed funding and tree planting to take place on the public space as well. Next slide, please. And I think finally, this is Dacre Park North, and again, a garage site, which we kind of removed the garages to develop 5 new council homes on an existing estate delivered by Lewisham Homes in a kind of muse type format, delivering genuinely affordable homes which we could house our residents on or our waiting list residents. Next slide, please. What is a supplementary planning document? So this looks very complicated, but just in terms of supplementary planning document, these do not make new policies. So what they do is they add further details to policies within our adopted local plan. So I think someone mentioned on the chat DM33. This document does not supersede DM33. DM33 is the policy that this document provides further detail and guidance on. They will be used as a material consideration in planning decisions. So if and when this document gets adopted by the council, our development management colleagues in the planning department will be using this document to assess planning applications. And it's important to say that the small sites SPD must be used alongside other relevant planning policy and guidance documents. So conservation area appraisals, you know, are there clearly to inform design process as well. This will not replace conservation area appraisals. This will sit in tandem with conservation area appraisals. Next slide, please. So why an SPD? The reasons that we prepare these SPDs is to speed up the planning process, and we want to do that in terms of small sites. We want to ensure consistent advice from our officers, high quality advice from our officers. We want to make sure that people understand the rules, and everyone from residents to kind of developers coming in as well. Ultimately, it's about ensuring that the delivery, that we deliver high quality homes and we improve the quality of those homes being delivered. We want to provide confidence and certainty to developers, local builders, and self-builders who may be looking at small sites but unsure about the process and unsure as to whether or not you know, we would be favourable to them building on it. We want to use the document to advise residents the benefits and also to help demystify the development process so that residents understand what the process of us assessing a small application is. And finally, we want to discourage permitted development, which the planning authority cannot control. So permitted development is passed down by the government, which allows people to build certain things without the consent of the local authority. So we want to try to provide people or nudge people in the direction of the planning process in which we can, in my view, deliver much better advice and ultimately secure that high quality home. Next, please. What are we consulting on? So there are 3 documents which we published. The first document is a kind of visioning document which sets out the council's aspirations for delivering small sites and gives you the background and approach to the SPD. The main document that we're consulting on and the main focus of interest is the Design Guide SPD, which is the kind of meat of the consultation and provides all the technical guidance. And then there is the appendix document, which provides kind of additional research and background information, which informed both the vision and the design guide. In terms of how the SPD, that second document, is structured, it's split into 3 detailed sections. The first is guidance, so that provides general information on the borough. The second section is the toolkit, which gives some general design advice on a number of topics. And then the third section is the detailed guidance, which provides specific guidance on development types and site types. And we'll go into that in a bit detail in the next couple of slides. So the guidance section, the first section of the document, provides the context of the document, planning policy areas, things like conservation areas, background on permitted development, the development flow chart, design and access guide, and small sites sustainability. Next slide, please. The second section of the document is the toolkit section. This is about nudging people in the right direction in terms of providing higher quality designs. So things like how to respond to vegetation and green space, how to think about internal spaces and the relationship with gardens, how to take advantage of developing in a group, how to create sustainable development, how to work with heritage and respond to conservation areas, etc., etc. Next slide, please. And then the final section, which is the kind of detailed section, is about selecting the type of site that you may have an interest in developing, how you identify which site your site falls under, and then there will be detailed guidance under each of those site types, which may include things like infill development, street infill, backland development, including kind of garages, mews, etc. And then there's another types which captures more of those kind of unusual sites that we find within the borough as well. So fantastic. So on to your kind of feedback. You know, what we're trying to gain out of these consultations is to provide awareness of the kind of SPD, provide a context and overview, but also to get your feedback directly. You know, how can we, you know, is the document helpful? What works within the document? Do you have any concerns? Is there anything that we have missed, or we could go into more detail? These are just some prompting questions that we have. We've now got approximately an hour to answer some of your questions. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to Tom, who's going to kind of field the questions, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, so I'll stop sharing now, and that should mean you can see us all a bit easier. If you want to turn your camera on, I believe you can now. Fantastic. What we'll do is we'll start. So I've just, everything has just gone in different places for me for a second there as I've stopped sharing. So the first question came from Tim Hughes regarding gardens, back gardens. Tim, if you're comfortable, I'll offer you to unmute and you can iterate your question if that's all right. Tim?
Yeah, that's fine. The question was simply, under DM33, there was a presumption against the development of back gardens. Back gardens were defined as gardens in use or developed with the original house. So there's no chance a developer just being able to get hold of a back garden, hold it for a few years, then say that's no longer garden land. Under the small sites guidance, it seems the definition of back garden has been changed to simply say it's not land not in use as a garden. So how is that consistent with DM33?
Thank you, Tim.
Do you want me to answer that? So in terms of DM33, the assumption there is that there's a presumption against development on gardens in perimeter blocks. So what we do not permit is garden development, which is essentially back-to-back gardens. And the SPD is not looking to change that policy. So we are not looking to encourage development on the back of gardens when you have a back-to-back relationship within the perimeter block. What we have permitted in the past, and what this document is advocating, is that where we have public access onto a garden plot. Now, it might be a lane, it might be a Muse street, it might be the end of terrace, and you are building on a garage, for example, or even the kind of garden space. As long as there is sufficient garden remaining, then that is acceptable. And Mona, I will kind of pass over to you from a development management point of view, but that is the position that Lewisham has been taking for as long as I've been here in terms of determining these applications. So we do not permit development on back-to-back gardens and perimeter blocks, but where there are circumstances where they front onto public realm, then they are generally acceptable. There are other local authorities who are taking a more extreme view, such as Croydon, to name one, who are allowing people to develop in the back garden. But personally, and I think collectively, in terms of the planning and housing team, we just didn't feel that was the correct approach for Lewisham. That's why that policy still, that guidance still remains in place. Mon, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, so just to follow on from that, so I do work in the strategic housing team, but I used to work with David as a planning officer, and basically the principle that all sites should be considered on their own merits is what's applied here. So a blanket no against garden development, I understand as a principle, but sometimes there are nuances. So as David said, and even one of the examples that we saw in the presentation, there are sometimes back gardens which have a flank aside onto a public road. And in the interest of creating interest in that street, creating more housing, creating natural surveillance, sometimes it just makes sense, especially when the garden's really deep, to be able to put a property at the end of that garden, which has direct access onto a public footpath. That is not giving blanket allowance to developing on gardens, as David was saying, and boroughs such as Croydon has a lot more space than we do. This borough is a lot more intimate typically. So we can't use that principle here. But I do think what this SPD is saying is it isn't a hard and fast rule. Sometimes there are situations where it should have a different approach applied to it. And this SPD is just suggesting that actually there could be cases, but you should also go to the planning department and just say, it's not a blanket principle saying we can or can't deliver on gardens. Here's my suggestion, what do you think? Typically as well, in terms of space, as David said, we have to make sure that there's enough garden left, and we have to make sure that the house that's being developed is of an acceptable size.
Would you like any follow-up question there, Tim? Or okay.
Well, I think there is a sort of related question to that, which is essentially if you take back gardens, developing a property on it, given the size of a back garden, developers will, or somebody selling the land will require a very handsome price for it, which then means developing something which you might find acceptable as a neighbour is extremely difficult, because the most likely answer is you need to put about 5 blocks of flats on it or equivalent, and that's to make it worthwhile for a developer. So how do you reconcile that as planners?
I think we haven't found that. I mean, there has been. I think it's important to say that small sites come forward all the time and delivered in Lewisham. In fact, I think we delivered not last year, but the year before, over 200 small sites units. So these things are happening anyway. But those kind of range from single units on a garage site, or a kind of small, kind of redundant piece of space, or a kind of garden, overlooking the public realm. So we haven't encountered that too much in terms of people selling off their gardens and delivering kind of flatted kind of accommodation. And I think that would be inappropriate. And therefore, through the planning application process, we would be saying we will not support this application. What we are looking for here, and what the guidance hopefully does, is provide certainty and design quality. And if someone was coming forward with 5 or 6 flats on a small site, which was only appropriate for a single dwelling, we would tell them.
David, thank you, Tim. So the next comment we have was, a question was from Marie. It was, can you provide a list of trusted local builders and developers? I'm going to pass this over to Monique quickly, because I know it's something that we're looking into.
So actually, what we can't do is recommend anyone. As the local authority, we wouldn't have the insurance, I would say, to guarantee anybody's work. What we are looking at internally are, hopefully the council, when we deliver our small sites, is working with those small builders, and we're speaking to the development, to the economies and partnerships team, to help us communicate with those small builders and small businesses. I'll be honest, I'm quite unsure and probably unlikely that the council will provide a list that we say is recommended, because I can see all sorts of problems with that going forward. But in terms of David's point about us supporting the small builders, the SMEs, it is definitely something that we want to encourage for any of the council loan sites, or if we're able to support them through Section 106 on bigger sites, if there's work that we can share with them or put in their direction for some of the sites we have. I know that's probably not the answer you wanted, but it's just in terms of protecting the council's position, I just want to manage expectations there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mon. So there was a number of then comments about the specific examples from Tamsin. And I think they're, just because they're commenting on specific ones, we'll move down to the next questions, if that's okay.
Shall we just pick that? I just want to pick up the kind of just
if you'd like to, yeah. I'll
just the overarching kind of question there, which I think is about architectural style. And I think we have to be very careful, because architectural style and whether people like the particular architecture that's being proposed or not is very difficult to judge. Some people like modern architecture, some people don't like modern architecture. I think particularly with the examples that we've shown, I'm not necessarily commenting on the architectural style. I'm commenting on what they actually do in terms of providing surveillance onto the street, making sure there's eyes on the street, providing a kind of sense of safety, providing ground floor mixed use. In the case of the kind of Sydenham High Street examples. And whilst we could definitely have a debate about the architectural merits of some of those schemes, it's about kind of holistically what they are kind of providing, I think.
Thank you, David. I know, Tamsin, if you wanted to reply or comment on any of that, I unmuted you a moment ago.
All right, thank you. it is that developers cut corners, and the way this draft guidance now sets out, there's no, it is simply encouraging that. As a gentleman said earlier, if somebody thinks that the end of their garden it has potential for development, the price will sort of go astronomical. And so generally to preserve the heritage, I mean, Lewisham being the inner London borough, but developed in sort of before, so Croydon and Bromley and places, has a lot of really good architectural heritage in streetscape. The council needs to sort of be quite firm in its guidelines. You said that this small sites document is subservient to the local plan, but you then also said it's a material consideration. And if people who are wanting to maximize profit can pick up on anything that is a material consideration, they can say, look, this is in the document, why can't we do it? And it's very difficult to, the playing field is already not a level one. It's geared in favour of the developers who can sort of take the council to court for not granting planning permission, and you want to sort of build yourself some good sandbags, and you want to use this document to do so.
Thank you, Tamsin. David?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're trying to achieve with this document, I think, as you kind of pointed out, is to provide us with the guidance to have those discussions with the developers. I would say that what we tend to find on small sites, particularly small sites, is that actually there is a higher chance of getting really good high quality design here, because quite often small sites are being kind of developed by a small builder or a self builder, or someone who is designing or using an architect to design their own home. So what we found in obviously the quality varies and stuff, but what we're trying to do with this document is to kind of maintain some consistency in high quality design, really. I think in terms of our conservation areas, we have the policies in place to resist poor quality design. We will and we should be refusing poor quality design in our conservation areas.
It can be a real battle at times, though.
Indeed. I mean,
and the worry is, particularly with the garden infill that Tim picked up. There's a clear pathway where people could develop on the side gardens. And it is so important to keep that proportion of open space per resident, which is a danger of being lost, particularly if you could then sort of nearby have a big multi-flat, multi-story development. But sorry, I've spoken enough. Carry on.
I think if it's really interesting to hear people's views, and if people have a particular view on any particular type. It sounds like we've got a couple, we've had a few questions about the kind of side garden, which is causing concern. And, I'd urge you to, to write to us through the kind of consultation platform to make your point, and then we will kind of respond to that. What we are trying to do is ensure kind of high quality design, and we are constantly. Not all developers are bad. I'd like to point that out. Some developers are good.
Some are good. Some are good. Yeah, I like to take apart. Actually, one general point though is there any potential for kickback with the whole of the London local authorities querying with the GLA and the London plan, which was developed, saying our housing needs are going to continue to skyrocket before COVID, because the perception now is that London might even start shrinking. And there's already, many people are leaving, having now found they can work from home. But because of the London plan and because of the danger of penalties, we're hell-bent on building more housing that people won't actually need.
That's
a big one. So
it is a big one, and this relates to our kind of local plan consultation, which we had a number of people making this comment, and I think we will be reviewing this with the GLA. My understanding my understanding is that the modelling that has been done by the GLA factors in the impact of COVID and the impact of Brexit. And there is still evidence that London will grow, but we will be asking those questions, and the GLA need to kind of respond to that in the future. But I'm just conscious that we might be steering into a local plan debate, which I'm more than happy to do, but let's try to concentrate on the small sites, Tom, if we can.
Super. Yeah. Thank you, David. Thank you, Tamsin. The next comment is from McKenna and Eka on a very specific site by the sounds of things. If you'd like to email us your queries about the specific site, we can see if we can help regarding that. And then the next comment after that is from Marie, so that the draft document is currently available on Commonplace and on Citizen Space, and there's links in the emails that you were sent out when you signed up for this event. We will obviously also when the document is adopted. So what we'll do is we'll now take all the comments on board. We'll then go take them back to the architects who were drawing up the draft document. They will make the required amendments, and then that will go through the adoption process. And then at that point, we'll have it available on the council's website. So there was a number of questions that came in from Monica Fletcher. Monica, where are you? I'm going to let you unmute, and if you'd like to ask most mortal ones of those, thank you.
Well, I suppose my whole set of questions really all relate to quality of life, urbanisation, densification, green space, accessibility, where children are going to play, and how we're going to live. I live here. I think according to your policy, you could build a building as tall as the one in front of me, 10 metres away from me, across here under your small sites policy. I think you'd be allowed to chop down all these trees. This is amenity land serving about, 40, 80 times 260 houses, 160 dwellings, probably in excess of the London GLA, London standards, but obviously not as valuable as somebody's private garden. I suppose just really appreciating the whole need for housing, but really scared about the kind of dense living spaces, unhuman scale, really destructive. You see them, we see some of what's been put up, Central Lewisham, Catford, Ladywell. Is that going to be the situation for the whole of Lewisham? See some really good small sites infill, see some really suitable places where land's being used in a great way. But locally, we've had a whole string of really, really aggressive, dense planning applications. The Maze House down the road, all kinds of stuff on, around Wells Park. The developers are eyeing up the land, councils eyeing up the land because, everybody needs homes. And seems to me when I read the small sites guidance, that it's just actually expressing this aspiration for warehousing people, cramming as many people in as possible, and really not valuing particularly the public realm, particularly anything in the public sector. So I've got a whole string of questions really about how you feel about that stuff. and what assurances you can give for us who live here about the quality of life we're going to see.
Thank you, Monica.
Those are some big questions, and obviously some real concerns. And I think what I would say is that with all of this, there is a kind of balance to be struck here. What we are being instructed to do by the GLA is to deliver more homes in the borough. The London plan advocates the densification of London to accommodate, the great housing kind of need that has been kind of identified, and Lewisham has to play its part. I think, when we talk about quality of life, the quality of life for someone who is tonight sleeping in temporary accommodation isn't great. And therefore we need to provide more homes for these people. We need to provide more genuinely affordable homes, but we also need to provide more homes across the board for people who want to own their own property. I accept that it's a balance, and, clearly people and existing residents of Lewisham value their kind of amenity spaces. When we are assessing development, what we're looking for in the first instance is develop on brownfield land, which is basically development or sites which have been previously developed. But land is scarce. And that is why London is struggling to meet its housing targets year on year. And that is why London is delivering greater density on those brownfield land sites. So in terms of our existing policy on amenity spaces, what we would be looking for if we were to make an assessment on the suitability of development on amenity spaces, has there been development there in the past? Is the space well used? Is there an oversupply of the space around any particular development or kind of estate? Is there a way to mitigate against the loss of that amenity space by improving adjacent amenity space for the residents? And then, there will be a balanced view, a balanced decision taken by the kind of planning officer. And then ultimately, particularly when we're dealing with amenity spaces, that decision by and large is taken to our elected councillors who are democratically elected to make these decisions, to make these tough decisions on the kind of balance argument. So that's the process that we go through when we're looking at kind of surplus amenity land.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Monica. So the next question we've got is from Vicky. I'm going to ask you to unmute if you'd like to reiterate your question, Vicky, or I can read it out if you'd like. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much. I think the guidance you produced is really excellent. I've spoken to David about this previously. I think for a architect working in the borough who finds themselves priced out of affording a home, we're currently at the mercy of private landlords. We're really interested to know how will this demand on the self-build register be dealt with by Lewisham in terms of releasing plots. Obviously, I've also made comments directly on the guidance you've provided about enhancing sustainability. I think needs to be further emphasised. I think it's great you've talked about passive house, but actually I think you need more examples so people know what it means, specifically around the glazing to solid ratio, making sure we're not building glass boxes anymore.
Tom, do you want to pick up the kind of detailed comments on sustainability?
I think it's a really good point. One of the part of the consultants team, we had a sustainability expert, and so all the guidance there was written specifically by her. I think we tried to strike a sort of balance between not reiterating where there's guidance elsewhere and pointing in the right direction. There's a lot of guidance, obviously, on passive house design. There's a lot that's come out by Letty on sustainable design. And so there was a real key for us to make sure that we're not overlapping and that we're linking people to those various sort of guidances that are available where possible. And I think if that's not clear, then we'll work at making that a bit more clear. But I think there's obviously a lot in the document, and the document's very large as it is, and sort of where possible, then we're trying to link to other sort of areas, and hopefully that'll come about. So, but thank you for that, and do give some more detailed comments in the commonplace about that, and we can sort of link to those. But yeah, thank you. And in regards to the small sites, the register, I think Monique, do you have something to pick up on that?
I'm happy to take that. So.
Self-build register, sorry. Self-build register.
Yeah, so just in the first instance, the register is there to alert the council of the amount of people who are interested in building their own sites. And David, please feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean that register means that when council land becomes available, then it's available for you. So again, in terms of managing expectations, when you said fulfill their obligation, as I understand it, the planning service have to grant planning permission for those types of properties. It doesn't mean the council has to give away its land. In the first instance, if the council has land that can be developed on, we, with our development delivery partner, Lewisham Homes, will seek to look to see if we can deliver a council home in the first instance. In the current programme, we are coming across sites which are becoming financially challenging to deliver. And that's even with the fact that the council own the site already. And that's because we understand that small sites are complicated. And this document in particular, for those reasons, is really useful for us as well. And we will have to take a longer term view on those sites to find out what we do with them in the long term. But that is in the long term. But that is not connected to, i.e. directly providing sites that the council owns to address the issue on the list of people on the Brownfield register.
I think just to add to that, so you know, the council has an obligation to meet the kind of demand of self-build, and that's why we have the self-build register. At the moment, we are meeting that demand. We have got 2 sites which we are delivering self-build homes through. Plus, as Monique says, we do approve a number of you know, self-build units or those units that qualify for self-build as windfall sites each year. There may come a point where we are not fulfilling that need, and that's where the council will have to look to address that. That may be through, you know, working with a private developer to see whether or not there are parts of a bigger or a larger site that can be split into kind of small sites for self-builds, etc. But it's difficult in London for a local authority to kind of fulfill that obligation. Much easier for you know, a local authority outside of London that can carve up you know, a big, you know, field that has been designated for housing, really. But we are open to suggestions, and I think what we were trying to do and what we are going to investigate is using the Brownfield Land Register more effectively. We've done a piece of work with the consultants who have helped us prepare this, looking at you know, lots of pieces of land within the borough that may be available for small sites. So we're looking at, you know, how do we use that information? How could that be, you know, publicly accessible? How do we make it easier for people to, you know, to understand what's available and then can contact landowners, etc., etc. So that's something that we're looking into, linked to this document as well.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Vicky. So the next question is from Marie Britz. I'll unmute you, Marie. Oh, hold on. I think I've unmuted the wrong person. Sorry. Marie, I think I've unmuted you there. If you want to ask a question. And this is the one, you said, could I build 5 homes, live in one and let the council let out the others or buy them? Would you like to elaborate on that at all? Oh, you're on mute still, Marie. Oh, I've asked you to unmute. I think you have to click unmute yourself. There you go.
Is that better?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
thank you.
Yeah, I've seen a few sites that are too big for one home. So if I built 5 homes and lived in one, would the council buy the others off me or rent them from me?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to pass you over to Monique at the moment because that's something she's working on at the moment.
Well, happy to have a conversation. We're still early days. We're still speaking to smaller sites or looking to speak to smaller site owners. It's all about viability. It's all about the numbers as much as it is about delivering homes. Small sites don't achieve the economies of scale as the larger sites do. But if there is a conversation to be had, of course we will welcome any addition to the council's housing stock of homes and how that works. So I would say outside of this conversation, I'm happy to have a direct conversation with you about your proposals there.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So yeah, I think it's also worth saying that if you were a private developer and you want to develop houses and have for then the council to let out as a social landlord, then you could get in touch with Lewisham Homes, who also manage all of the properties that Lewisham Council owns, and they let them out to the council's waiting list, the sort of most needed families within the borough. So yeah, thank you for your question, Marie. So the next question is from, I think Tamsin is commenting on that question about the side access gardens again, and then again from Vicky discussing a heat network. I think that might have related to your previous question. Is there anything else to elaborate on that question, Vicky? I've just unmuted you.
Yeah, it was just that I think that's probably not appropriate for very small sites. If you're talking to one to 3 houses, allowing for that future connection, it's really about how open are you to people setting their own sustainability targets, instead of going for the HQM, which is quite broad, then perhaps making a note about people could say they're going for passive house or they're targeting net zero carbon. I wonder if the heat network is appropriate for all sites.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think like we said, obviously this is something we're targeting as much as we can, and with the guidance in the document on sustainability. But you're right, it is very difficult to create a heat network for a very small amount of sort of homes. There is Lewisham are developing heat network at the moment. Is that right, Monique?
So we've got one in the north of the borough. And sometimes we have them for smaller, when I say smaller, larger sites. And we will typically ask them, the planners will typically ask them to create connections for future connections, but not on individual sites, on individual roads. What I will say is, again, each site's considered on their own merit. So if your site happens to be close to one of those, then perhaps the planners will ask you to put pipe work on your site for future potential connection in the anticipation that there'll be longer term, larger investment which will connect to that road. But that's on a site-by-site basis. And I think at the moment they are mostly focused on sites in the north of the borough where we already have the beginnings, and we already have is it called cell chip up there.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. David, did you have anything to add?
No, Tom, no.
No, wonderful. Thank you very much, Vicky. The next question is from Lanray about the policy H2 area map. Let me just find you and unmute you, and you can ask that, Lanray.
Hi there. Good evening.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks.
Excellent. Yeah, good evening all, and just wanted to say, first of all, congrats on the document. It's very, it's quite comprehensive, quite clear. Obviously, there are particular kind of, potential discussions to be had around alignment with London Plan in some areas, but on the whole, it's a great document and particularly well illustrated. With some really good precedents and case studies as well, which are very helpful for, applicants, consultants, and hopefully for yourselves as well. Just a quick question on the H2 policy map. By happenstance, happened to be working on a site in Lewisham, and it falls slap bang in the middle of an area not covered in orange. So I just wanted to know, and maybe pick up on Monique's, I guess, indication of flexibility. How hard and fast is that policy map in terms of any sites that potentially fall outside of those orange areas?
I think I'll direct that one to Tom. Yeah.
To me.
I mean,
maybe I
can.
Sorry, David.
Yeah, maybe I can answer that. I mean, I think the GLA's map was meant to be an indication of the scale and breadth of opportunity for small sites, not necessarily, you know, if your site falls out with these areas, then that is a definite no. It will be one for essentially us as planners then to consider whether the proposal is appropriate in the kind of location and the context. So it's not a kind of hard and fast rule, much like most policies. It's about you know, the kind of balance and the kind of judgment. So there might be entirely appropriate development, small site development out with that those kind of areas covered in H2.
Excellent. No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lanre. Thank you, David. So the next question is from Tim. You're asking about architects who wrote the document. This is a comment we've had also in the consultation as well. So the document was created by a consultant team. This was so the funding for us writing this policy came from the GLA. And the stipulation of that funding is it went through the ADUP framework, which is the, I've forgotten the acronym now, it's the Architecture, Development and Urbanism panel. And so they have a selection of sort of pools of consultants that sit on that. They are obviously, a lot of those are architects, are planners, and have the background in sort of design, graphics, the understanding of the policy that it takes to write a document like this. So it's to suggest that there's that architects may be trying to sort of turn this into their favor, I think is disingenuous to the sort of the process that we're going through at the moment. And they're basically, they're the consultants which have the skill set to enable to write this policy. And we're not able to just go to sort of, I guess, anyone and ask us to write this sort of very comprehensive policy, which is a lot of the time being followed by architects who will be putting in the applications on behalf of the developers, on behalf of the homeowners, on behalf of the housing associations, or even the council. They're the people who do the planning applications. So the aim is that this policy sort of makes it easier for those applications to align with the grasp that we and planners have of the borough, to make sure that everyone's sort of talking the same language, and that it makes it easier for people to sort of start that conversation. Now they have this knowledge that sort of lifts them up to the sort of level of a lot of the architects and the big developers who have the money to, I guess, hire all these architects to do these applications. David, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that at all.
I would just say that, you know, this is not uncommon practice. You know, we do this all the time with framework documents. The Catford Master Plan, for example, is being prepared by a consultant of architects. Previous SPDs have been prepared by architects. You know, we write a very clear brief for those architects, and we work collaboratively with those architects through the process. And then ultimately we have public consultation through the process of preparing the document, and then ultimately it has to be adopted and approved by our elected officials through kind of mayor and cabinet. So you know, this is not an unusual process. We have the checks and balances in place, and we have lots of opportunities for people to comment on the documents, and then, you know, the approval process is through the democratic process. So yeah, just to reiterate what Tom says, you know, this isn't architects, effectively pulling the wool over our eyes. We are working with them to prepare, guidance that we think is essential to produce high quality small site development.
Just to add on that, if you don't mind, Tom, a small point to note. So I work in the council's housing delivery side. So we are the developers, and the benefit of adding our contribution to the document is we want to know how to develop these small sites in the most effective way, and how we get through the planning system that saves time and is efficient and is consistent with what the planners want for sites. So it's not about, as Tom and both David and Tom said, about anyone pulling the wool over each other's eyes. It's about all of us being on the same playing field when it comes to understanding what is needed for a site and what is needed from the policies. And when we're submitting a planning application, the process is a lot smoother. So I think there's definitely benefit to having architects who are the applicants and developers who are the applicants feeding into this process, so that everybody who needs to use it gets the benefit of it.
Thank you, Moni. Thank you, David. So the next question we've got is from Tamsin, is about the London Plan of the City of London converting office space. Tamsin, I'm just going to find where you are to unmute you if you'd like to elaborate on that question, Tamsin.
No need to elaborate, just putting it on the record that when going back to the GLA, sort of make this point.
Yeah, it's a point that we will make. It's again, it's more about the kind of context and the housing figures, and I very much take that point on board, particularly with the kind of changes to permitted development, and the kind of permitted development rights of changing office space to residential as well, which, let's be clear that Lewisham does not, we do not approve of. We think losing office space to turn into residential is a nonsense, really, and shouldn't really be happening. But we do not have control over that. It is permitted development, the government legislation.
Can I just add to that as well, from a housing delivery side of things? There are 10,000 families on the council's register awaiting a home. There are around 900 families in temporary accommodation. So from our perspective, we've got a bit of a journey to go to before we can start talking about the over provision of homes through these other things. I'm not saying that they're not going to come forward, but we still have a lot of work to do before we can comfortably start eroding the numbers of people who are looking for homes in the borough.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Tamsin. The next question is from Tim again. I'm going to unmute you, Tim, and let you elaborate on this one.
Yeah, my question is really a question around overdevelopment, in that a lot of these small sites, we had a particular example where a developer brought a back half of a neighbour's garden for 500 grand and then tried to put 5 flats on it. The council actually approved it. It was only stopped in the end because he went to the inspectorate who said it is a garden, it's overdevelopment, and it's wrong. So how do we, under this small sites guidance, prevent the council wasting money on things like that?
I'm not sure I can comment on sort of particular cases. I don't know the kind of details of that case. If that was approved by the council, then we obviously, or the case officer obviously, felt there was kind of merit on that. But it's not. That is not what we. It's certainly not what we are expecting to be kind of delivered through this kind of small sites. We're not expecting overdevelopment, and I think what the guidance is trying to do is trying to make it clearer, in terms of what would be acceptable and what would be considered overdevelopment and therefore refusable. That's our general approach. Mon, did you want to add anything?
So the only thing I was going to add, again, in terms of sitting on the development side of the fence from the council's perspective, the cost of the price of land is completely irrelevant to the planners when it comes to deciding what goes on the site. That's viability is the developer's issue, not the planner's issue. So if in that instance the 5 flats were deemed acceptable, they were deemed acceptable notwithstanding whatever that applicant paid for the site.
Wonderful. Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Tim. The next question is from Tamsin again. I think this was following up the previous question. Is that right, Tamsin?
Yeah, not a comment, just a sort of a sort of follow on from the point made that the plan was being written by, understandably, architects and developers. Okay. As, you know, as long as it's balanced off.
Thank you. Right, yeah, I didn't see when that comment was made, so thank you for clarifying that. So the next question we've got is by Monica Fletcher. Monica, I'm just going to ask you to unmute yourself, and you can reiterate that. A fair number of those, some seem to be from architect developer backgrounds. As you discuss, clarity is helpful and discussion useful. How do you get the community informed and involved, particularly those affected alongside the developments? Do you want to elaborate on your question at all?
It was really just follow up to the conversation that you were having and about, you know, who is actually involved in this meeting. I'm struck by how small this meeting is, as they always are, inevitably. And I do think most people won't know about your small sites development. Obviously, you're doing what you can to push the local plan process forward, and the small sites. You know, you're running these events, but I do think that most people don't appreciate the impact of these changes. I think, you know, reading the documents, I spend a lot of time reading these documents. I really struggle with them, particularly, you know, on the devices that I have. I can't get paper copies, and they're actually really difficult to download and manage. I know a lot of people who only have phones. And, you know, we see in this conversation, quite a lot of these people here tonight are from the developer background. They're not from the community background, much less from the homeless background. And of course, as David says, the people on the housing list are also an important voice in this whole agenda. But it's how, you know, I think there's real issues about how we inform people about what's coming and what's going to happen. And the changes, these kind of massive changes that we're going to see across the borough, right across the borough with these policies. You know, you look at that H2 area, and you know, you're all saying it doesn't follow that if you're outside the H2 area, your site's not right for urbanisation, even in those small patches of Lewisham that are still white, and I don't know. It fills me with dread. It stops me sleeping at night, which may seem crazy, but I think people just don't know. And how do you get that perspective in there? How do you broaden that discussion out, especially during the pandemic? Obviously, you can't stop everything for the pandemic. You know, your initial publicisation of this SPD went out just for developers. It was come late to your consultation hub. You know, so you've had a kind of developer, promoter discussion first. And I do think it's good to have clarity, because reality is, as a community, we waste tons and tons and tons of time and energy trying to articulate the way this is going to affect people in order not to be heard. And if we know we're not going to be heard from the outset, stops us, you know, talking and wasting our time. You know, it makes us move out of Lewisham. As somebody said to me when I first started reading these policies, people with money will move, people without money will have to put up with whatever they can get. I don't think that's the kind of Lewisham I want to see. I don't think that's open, welcoming, inclusive. But I do think it's the message I take from this round of planning policies, obviously driven largely by the local plan. Anyway, sorry. So it's, how do you involve people? How do you get people to know?
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge. I will be the first to admit that. To get people engaged in the planning process, particularly planning policy, is an incredible challenge. We've just we've just undertaken the kind of local plan consultation, where we've had our best ever response to a local plan. And when we compare it to other local plans which have been delivered through throughout London, pre-pandemic and within the pandemic period, it is exceptionally high. And yet we only received 1,400 responses in a borough of however many thousands of people. People do not want to engage. We try as much as we can with the resources that we have to engage with people. If we weren't in a pandemic, we'd be on the ground. We have been on the ground pre the kind of COVID pandemic, discussing policy with people. And yet we find it very difficult to get people to be engaged with that. And quite frankly, some people, they have other concerns. So it is sometimes very difficult to get people to understand the magnitude of some of the policy decisions that we have to make, but also the policy decisions that are kind of enforced on the borough by the GLA and by central government. So what we do is we do the best we can. We reach out to as many people as we can. We reach out to our community groups, our amenity societies, to help us promote consultation. We use our councillors and ask them to promote the consultation. But as officers, there's only so much that we can do. And then we have to kind of respond to those people who actually do engage with the process, and being mindful of the people that maybe are harder to reach, and trying to kind of connect with them through other networks as well. So, we do everything we can to kind of reach people within the kind of scope and remit of our resources on projects.
I think with this one specifically, what we've done is, like they've said, as much as we can, we've been out on the Facebook and Twitter every week with this information, linking to the Commonplace and the Citizen Space Hub, so people can look at the sort of the proposed changes. In normal times we would have had them in the libraries and things, but obviously they're shut at the moment, so we haven't been able to do that, which has been a real shame. And we have tried to sort of increase the outlook and get it out to as many of our sort of networked groups that we have sort of email contacts for. As David said, we have connected with our amenity societies and conservation groups, and the amenity societies largely to the sort of west and north of the borough, but they aim to sort of speak up for a lot of residents, and we had a consultation with them last week. We tried to get into a number of local newspapers, but unfortunately they weren't keen to write an article on it. We put advertising in local newspapers through our standard sort of planning advertising system. So we, like David said, we have tried as hard as we can to get as many people interested in this sort of consultation. But I also think it's worth reiterating the sort of the I guess one of the first slides that we said, which is this is sort of guidance on existing policy as well. So the local plan is new policy that is making changes. This is guidance on existing policy, and I think that the gravity of that in comparison is quite low. And I think one of the things, if people do have time to sort of look at policy, the local plan, which only just finished consultation, I think holds a lot more weight. And so I think it's being understand, so I guess, again, where this sits, and that hopefully this document, even when it's adopted, will enable more people to understand the policy positions that it provides guidance on. And when we are allowed to sort of go back in libraries and be in person, we will have these printed versions of this document where it's allowed. And they're also, I think there might be budget for this to be printed upon request and put into a local library if and again, when COVID restrictions allow. That's been one of the difficulties, but the document does conform to all of the sort of viewing regulations, so you can view it on the phone, though it is obviously a lot harder than it is to view it on a PC. The places where we've been showing it in consultation at the moment, you can view in screen instead of having to download it. So we have tried as hard as we can to make it as easy to sort of work through. But I do understand your concern, and thank you for flagging that, Monica, and thank you for replying, David. So we've only got 7 more minutes left of this. So we've got one more question, another question from Tim. How does it impact conservation areas? Tim, would you like to elaborate on that? I just offered you to unmute.
It's just a general question in that I know there's a section in there that deals with conservation areas, but it'd be useful to hear probably David's view as to the impact.
So we this document will sit alongside the conservation area appraisals and the existing policies that we have on conservation areas. So you know, the assessment that the development management officer will be making is drawn from this SBD, our current local plan policy, but also any conservation area appraisal that is covering a conservation area. So I think what we're saying is that you know, in terms of our conservation areas, they are not fixed and static pieces of city. They have always been and will always be constantly moving and shifting, and things will be built in there. But in conservation areas, the guidance and the control and obviously the design quality will have to respond to the character of that specific area and draw from that specific appraisal in the conservation area. So there's quite a bit of work to do for a kind of developer and architect, particularly when they're looking at proposing kind of small sites within conservation areas, because they have to demonstrate that small site, that development will respond positively and contribute to the character of the conservation area. We've had some fantastic small sites developed in conservation areas, and we have seen some terrible proposals being kind of submitted to the planning department that we've had to refuse in conservation areas. So so it's about the quality and the response to the character of that conservation area.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Tim. So we've got another question. Just quickly, this is recorded and it will be available via the Commonplace page where the meeting event was advertised. And the last question is on, and we've got 4 minutes to answer this, the new local plan will supersede this guidance. I guess, David, could you just sort of confirm, I guess, the difference between the old local plan and the new local plan with this specific policy for us?
So the current adopted local plan, obviously this SBD hangs off of that current adopted local plan. As we move forward with the local plan, the new local plan process, and just to tell everyone, we still are at a fairly early stage with that draft local plan. We've just gone out to a Regulation 18 consultation. It will take us, 6 to 9 months to get out to a Reg 19 consultation. We don't expect that new local plan to be adopted. We're probably looking at 2022, just given the timescales that local plans take to kind of prepare and get through a kind of examination process. We expect this SPD, if it is approved following this consultation, if it is approved by Mayor and Cabinet, then it will be effective immediately when we have that approval. When the new local plan is adopted, we will probably have to do an update to this document if we want to continue with this SPD.
Wonderful. Thank you. John, did you have anything to further add? Bearing in mind we've only got 2 minutes left of this. I know you're unmuted already.
Thank you. No, that's very helpful. Apologies for joining late. I am a sort of citizen rather than developer, just because I picked up the earlier conversation. I think there is an issue, if I may just use the opportunity, there is an issue with commenting on documentation that you produce. Clearly, and I have been a local government officer myself, clearly when you produce something, you want to produce something that looks quite polished. And it's very actually hard to actually work out sometimes where it's open to comment on. I mean, in practice, and also because it doesn't have options. It very rarely has options, and I'm just saying it is quite difficult to engage with drafts because clearly they are your best effort, but that leaves them quite sort of whole and complete and glossy. It's difficult. But I just want to share that observation.
Yeah,
thank you, John. I think that's a fair point. I mean, obviously, we want to try to make the document as engaging as possible, and including the kind of desktop publishing of the report, the layout, so people can comment on the layout, the examples. That is not to say that these things can't change. And the example that I'd give is the extensions and alterations SPD that we prepared a few years back. From the kind of draft to the final document, there were some significant changes that took place during that process, responding to community consultation. So there is definitely opportunity to change this document to get your views in and shape the document. So please do so. And I think with that, that brings me on quite nicely to just sort of thanking everyone for joining us tonight, thanking everyone for your very relevant, pertinent questions, some of which have been kind of challenging. And I think, that is great. We like to be kind of challenged on these things. Please do provide your comments, response through the commonplace or via email, so that we can have a kind of official record of your comments and your thoughts on the document. Tom, do you want to give any detail on that?
We'll make a note of the comments that were here today, but to have official sort of comment and response, which we will do after the consultation ends, please add your comments to either the commonplace, the citizen space, or email them to the small sites email address. We will upload this along with the other recordings to the commonplace website, where all the information is held. So you can either go through it through the regular Lewisham website, the citizen space commonplace website, or citizen space, sorry, Lewisham Small Sites SPD website, or the commonplace website, which will all have links to. It will have links in the emails that you were sent. And thank you all very much. Sorry, we've run over for 1 minute. I will end the meeting now, but thank you all for your time. Bye.
Thank you.